Ladies and gentlemen, silence creates space for accountability in a way that words often cannot. In any relationship, when conflict arises or boundaries are crossed, the instinctive reaction is to reach out, to explain, justify, argue, or persuade. But this impulse, while emotionally understandable, often interferes with the natural process of reflection. When we constantly insert ourselves into the other person's emotional space, we may think we are fixing the problem, when in fact, we are preventing the very discomfort that drives growth. Silence, intentional and grounded in self-respect, becomes a powerful tool not for punishment, but for clarity. When you step back and stop communicating, you allow reality to settle in for the other person without the interference of your voice buffering the consequences of their actions. Silence forces a pause in the emotional noise. It removes the crutch of distraction and forces the other person to sit with their decisions, behaviors, and motivations. This is where accountability begins. When someone is used to you being readily available, quick to respond, to soothe, to negotiate, they develop a subtle dependence on your presence to shield them from the weight of their own behavior. Silence disrupts that pattern. It says, "I'm not going to carry this emotional burden for you." That absence makes space for them to ask the questions they've been avoiding. Why did this happen? What role did I play? How do I repair what I've damaged? Those questions are the seeds of accountability, and they rarely bloom in the soil of constant reassurance. Silence also serves as a mirror. Without your words to distract or soften, the other person is left alone with their thoughts and conscience. It is there, in that space, that real self-examination can begin. They may replay conversations, feel the sting of your absence, and begin to grasp the reality that their actions have real consequences. This realization isn't immediate. It requires time, space, and the willingness to feel discomfort, but silence allows that process to begin in a way that speaking often cannot. You are no longer enabling denial or defensiveness. You are instead inviting responsibility. Moreover, silence challenges the other person to make a decision. Will they take responsibility, grow from the experience, and step forward with integrity? Or will they remain stagnant, blaming you for the silence rather than asking what created it? Their response reveals their character and their readiness, or lack thereof, to be in a healthy, respectful relationship. That clarity is crucial, and it only surfaces when you're not doing the emotional labor for them. Choosing silence is not passive. It is an active, deliberate boundary rooted in respect, both for yourself and for the potential of the other person to rise to a higher standard. It is not a silent treatment rooted in anger or manipulation, but a calm declaration: I will not chase you into accountability. I will create the space for you to walk there on your own. And in that space, if the person is willing, true accountability can finally take root. Your absence speaks louder than your repeated presence because it breaks a pattern that has grown familiar, even taken for granted. When you are always there, always calling, always texting, always checking in, you become part of the background noise in someone's life. That constant presence can blur the edges of your worth. Familiarity, as they say, often breeds complacency. People begin to assume that you'll always be there, no matter what they do or don't do. Your effort becomes expected, not appreciated. Your words lose weight, not because they aren't sincere, but because they're always available. But the moment you step back, truly step back without announcement or drama, something changes. The silence becomes deafening. The gap you leave behind speaks of boundaries, value, and dignity in a way constant attention never could. Absence forces recognition. When someone has grown used to your presence, they stop seeing it as a gift and start seeing it as a given. But when that presence is no longer there, it causes a rupture in their emotional landscape. They begin to feel what they could not see when you were always near, that your energy, time, and care were never guaranteed. That you, too, can walk away. That love is not license for disrespect, and loyalty is not permission for neglect. The space you leave behind is not empty. It's charged with meaning. It forces them to confront the weight of your absence and realize what your presence truly meant. Being constantly present, especially in the face of mistreatment or indifference, teaches others that they do not need to change to keep you. It sends the message that no matter what they do or fail to do, you'll still be there. This reinforces unhealthy dynamics. It conditions people to believe that love should tolerate everything, even what is harmful. But absence disrupts that conditioning. It says, I am no longer willing to give without being seen, heard, or valued. It reminds them that your presence was a choice, not an obligation. When you pull back without explanation, you allow your silence to become a message, and that message is powerful because it's not wrapped in argument, justification, or desperation. It's not something they can debate, interrupt, or deny. It simply exists, quietly, firmly, and demands to be felt. It introduces uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes introspection. They begin to wonder why you're no longer calling, why the texts have stopped, why your attention is no longer a constant. That wondering is important. It's what often sparks a deeper understanding of your role in their life. Sometimes, it's only through your absence that they recognize the depth of your presence. True presence is meaningful when it's respected, but when it's assumed, it loses impact. That's why your absence, handled with grace and self-respect, can speak volumes. It shifts the emotional dynamic. It reintroduces the idea that access to you is a privilege, not a right. It says, if you want me, show me. If you value me, act like it, because I will not remain where I am unseen. Change requires discomfort because comfort sustains the status quo. As human beings, we are naturally drawn to what is familiar, predictable, and safe, even if that familiarity comes at the cost of growth or self-respect. We stay in relationships that no longer serve us, cling to routines that drain us, and avoid hard conversations because they disrupt our emotional ease. But real, lasting transformation only begins when staying the same becomes more painful than the fear of change. Discomfort is the signal that something isn't working, and it is through that signal that awareness starts to sharpen. Without discomfort, there is no urgency, no inner demand for adjustment. The moment things start to hurt, when the illusion of peace breaks down, is often the moment when change becomes not only possible but necessary. Discomfort strips away the false narratives we use to justify inaction. It interrupts the cycles of avoidance, denial, and rationalization. When we're uncomfortable, we can no longer pretend that everything is fine. We start to question our decisions, our surroundings, and sometimes even our identity. This questioning, though painful, is crucial. It opens the door to insight, and from insight, we find direction. Many people try to make changes from a place of comfort, but those changes are usually superficial. They don't last because there's no emotional cost attached. It's only when we feel the sting of being ignored, of being stuck, of watching our own standards slip, that we're jolted awake. In relationships, especially, discomfort plays a central role in transformation. When someone feels the weight of your absence or the consequences of their choices, that discomfort has the potential to become a catalyst. If you keep showing up, explaining, fixing, or soothing, you remove the discomfort that would otherwise make them pause and reflect. Growth is often born in those long, uncomfortable silences when a person finally sees what their actions have caused. It is not cruelty to allow someone to feel the natural consequences of their behavior. It is respect for yourself and for their capacity to rise to something higher. Shielding someone from discomfort is not love, it's enabling. True love sometimes says, I won't protect you from the pain that teaches. Discomfort is also the engine behind self-discipline. Whether it's ending a toxic pattern, setting boundaries, or walking away from something that no longer aligns with your values, every meaningful act of change demands that you walk through the fire of uncertainty and fear. It is not easy to sit with the ache of loss, or the guilt of confrontation, or the loneliness of detachment, but sitting with it is often the very thing that elevates you to the next version of yourself. Avoiding discomfort may give temporary relief, but it guarantees long-term stagnation. Embracing it, welcoming it as part of the process, builds emotional muscle and self-respect. Change doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes wrapped in discomfort that challenges you, shakes you, and ultimately shapes you into someone wiser, stronger, and more whole. Clarity comes in solitude because solitude strips away distraction, noise, and the expectations of others. In a world that constantly demands our attention, through messages, notifications, and conversations, it's easy to lose touch with our inner voice. We become reactive instead of reflective, shaped by external input rather than internal truth. Solitude forces us to be still, to sit with our thoughts without interruption, and that stillness creates space for clarity. It is in the quiet, when there is no one to impress or respond to, that we begin to see our lives for what they really are. Patterns emerge, truths become harder to avoid, and the confusion that once clouded our decisions begins to lift. Many people fear solitude because it magnifies what they've been trying to suppress. The pain of a broken relationship, the weight of bad decisions, or the anxiety about the future. These things are easy to avoid when we're constantly around others or buried in digital distractions. But avoidance never brings peace. It only delays the moment of reckoning. Solitude, while uncomfortable at first, eventually becomes the mirror that reflects what we need to see most. It doesn't lie. It doesn't offer false comfort. It simply shows you where you are and invites you to decide where you're going next. That kind of honesty is what clarity is made of. In solitude, you are no longer performing. You are not trying to be liked, understood, or accepted. You just are. And in that space, you get to ask questions without judgment. What do I want? What do I need? What have I been tolerating that's beneath me? What am I afraid to let go of, and why? These are the kinds of questions that bring clarity, not because they offer instant answers, but because they guide you toward deeper truths. And you can't hear those truths in the noise of other people's opinions. You need solitude to let those answers rise from within. Solitude also helps separate emotion from insight. When we're hurt, angry, or overwhelmed, we often make decisions out of urgency rather than wisdom. But solitude allows time for emotions to settle. It gives us space to process rather than react. When you give yourself that space, you start to see what actually matters and what doesn't. You begin to understand the difference between what you want and what you need. And most importantly, you come to terms with what's worth holding on to and what's time to release. In relationships especially, solitude can provide the kind of clarity that closeness often clouds. Sometimes you can't see clearly until you step back, until the emotional fog lifts and you're no longer entangled in someone else's energy. You begin to realize what was real and what was projection, what was love and what was dependency. That realization is hard, but it's essential, because once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend. Solitude doesn't just show you the truth, it strengthens you to live by it, and that is where true clarity begins. Self-respect is a boundary, not a weapon, and understanding this distinction is crucial in how we engage with others and with ourselves. Many people confuse the act of setting boundaries with acts of punishment or revenge, especially in the emotional heat of relationships. But real self-respect does not seek to harm, shame, or manipulate. It simply defines what is and isn't acceptable. It is not loud, aggressive, or defensive. It doesn't need to prove a point or win an argument. Instead, self-respect calmly says, "This is where I stand," and then remains there whether or not others agree. It's an internal compass, not an external weapon. When you truly value yourself, you don't need to destroy others to protect your peace. You just walk away from what no longer honors your dignity. There's a subtle strength in choosing not to retaliate, not to chase, and not to beg for what should be freely given. That strength is what self-respect is made of. It recognizes that you can care deeply about someone and still not accept treatment that diminishes you, that you can have compassion without allowing yourself to be a doormat. When you use boundaries as tools of self-respect, they are not there to control other people. They are there to protect your integrity. You are not saying you must change, but rather, if you don't, I will choose differently. That choice is yours to make, and making it with grace rather than anger is what separates strength from spite. People who haven't yet developed a sense of self-respect often tolerate too much. They keep trying to explain their worth instead of simply standing in it. They hope that being more patient, more forgiving, or more understanding will eventually earn them the treatment they deserve. But self-respect changes that dynamic. It says you don't have to keep proving anything. You don't have to fight for a seat at a table where you're constantly being asked to shrink. You don't lash out, you don't seek revenge. You simply leave the table. Using self-respect as a weapon often stems from unresolved pain. Someone feels hurt, so they set a boundary with the intention of causing hurt in return. But that's not self-respect. That's retaliation disguised as growth. True self-respect doesn't need to cause pain. It's not interested in playing games or making a point. It is quiet, steady, and rooted in knowing your own value. It creates safety, not drama, and it allows you to move forward without bitterness, even when others don't understand or approve. When you stop using boundaries to punish and start using them to protect, your relationships begin to shift. The people who respect you will remain, perhaps even rise to meet your standard. The people who are only there for what they could take will likely fall away. That's not loss, it's alignment, and it all starts when you stop viewing self-respect as something you wield and start seeing it as something you live by. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate because human behavior naturally adapts to boundaries, either the presence of them or the absence of them. Every time you accept something that makes you feel small, overlooked, disrespected, or undervalued without addressing it, you silently give permission for it to happen again. Whether you realize it or not, your silence becomes part of the pattern. People observe what they can get away with, and if there are no consequences, no resistance, no line drawn in the sand, they begin to believe that their behavior is acceptable. What you allow continues, not because others are inherently cruel or careless, but because you've never shown them that you expect better. And over time, what began as one small compromise can grow into a cycle of mistreatment. Tolerance is not always kindness. Often it is fear. Fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, or fear of being misunderstood. But that fear costs you more than it protects. Every time you avoid standing up for yourself to keep the peace, you start a quiet war within yourself. That internal conflict, where your values are clashing with your actions, builds resentment not just toward the other person, but toward yourself, and people can sense that tension even if they can't name it. You begin to lose clarity about who you are and what you deserve. What starts as emotional flexibility becomes emotional self-erasure, and by the time you realize it, you may already feel disconnected from your own standards. When you tolerate disrespect even once, it sets a precedent. It signals to the other person that they don't need to be careful with your heart, your time, or your energy. That kind of tolerance often comes from a desire to be liked, loved, or accepted. But genuine connection isn't built on one-sided effort or silent suffering. It's built on mutual respect, and respect must be taught. Not through lectures or ultimatums, but through consistent action. By walking away when you're not honored, by choosing not to explain your worth, and by showing that access to you must be earned, not assumed. People don't change when you beg them to treat you better. They change when they realize they must treat you better to keep you in their life. That realization doesn't come through arguments. It comes through boundaries. Through your refusal to accept less than what you know is right. The way you carry yourself, the way you respond to poor behavior, and the standards you uphold all create a silent framework that others learn to navigate. You teach them, this is what I expect, and if you can't meet it, I will remove myself. Over time, the lesson becomes clear. Those who respect your boundaries will rise to meet them. Those who don't will fall away. Either way, you remain grounded in your self-worth. You teach people how to treat you, not by your words alone, but by what you allow, what you challenge, and what you refuse to accept.